Hey, what's going on, guys? Curtis with ThatTurboDakota. So it's Saturday. We are back in the shop working on the Dakota. The Holly install continues. We definitely need some redemption after that horrible audio fail yesterday. So it was a lesson learned. I guess next time I need to bring my wind protection for my microphone. So no big deal. Again, we'll figure it out as we go. I do have a new shop helper, and I'm really excited to show you guys. She's going to lend a big hand in working on the Dakota. I think maybe more like a paw, less than a hand. But let's see if we can. She's around here somewhere. There she is. Come here, Dolly. So this is Dolly. She is a Burma Doodle. She's a Burmese mixed with a poodle. She is the newest addition to the channel. Right now, she's just kind of inspecting my work, making sure everything I did so far is legit. Give her a better shot. Like I said, she's inspecting everything, making sure everything's in line, making sure I'm being safe. You gotta kind of keep a close eye on her. She's just a baby. But you guys are gonna see a lot more of her as we go on. Anyway, so like I said, back in the shop with the Dakota. The Holly install continues. I'm gonna start putting my sensors in today, kind of mounting everything up. That's kind of like stage number 2, is everything has to be fast mounted before we can run any wiring or do any crimping or cutting or any of that stuff. So let me get after it, and I'll show you guys what we got going on. Okay, so I'm wrenching on the Dakota, and I figured this is actually a really good opportunity to talk about the crank sensors for the 5.9 360 or the 5.2 motor. You may or may not know, your crank sensor is actually down all the way down here back in this corner. That crank sensor and the sensor in the distributor, now my distributor is out, but those two sensors work together, and their job is to tell the computer where the motor is in its 360-degree rotation. And why is that important? Well, that's important because the computer needs to know when to fire the injectors for each cylinder and when to fire the coil. So if you ever have an issue, and I've seen it before as I was a technician, where when your truck gets hot, you're driving down the road, it just shuts off. What will happen is the crank sensor will actually start to get hot, and then it just shorts out. And then when the computer loses that signal and can no longer figure out where it's at in its rotation, well then, it can't fire the injectors, it can't fire the coil, motor shuts off. And what you notice is if you're cranking the motor and you're tacking your dash, you're not going to have a tack, because that's also how you get the RPM. That's how the computer knows the RPM, which aids in some other stuff as far as automatic transmission shifting. So anyway, this sensor is way down here in the back corner, and it is a bear to get to right now. So that's the connector right there, and typically you'd find this connector kind of laying back here in the distributor, obviously hooked to the main harness, which on my truck I have it pulled. So back down here on the bell housing, there's a bracket. Now, to get that sensor out, what I use, I have an extension with I believe it's a 13 millimeter swivel socket. There's 2 bolts. Those bolts face straight down. So I take that thing and reach down there, the top of them, and then pull them both out. That's the easiest way I found to do it. Like I said, this goes for any of the 318, 360 setup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it out real quick. I'll turn the camera back on, and we'll look at that bracket, and I'll show you those bolts. That sensor takes its reading off the flex plate. The flex plate has little windows, and every time the sensor passes by one of those windows, it tells the computer, the computer has a rough idea where it goes or where it's at, again, along with that sensor and that distributor. So just give me a second. I'm going to turn this camera off, get this thing out, and we'll look at it again. Okay, I'm back. So real quick, here is I have a spare block that I've been kind of holding on to, and this is actually a perfect way to show you guys how this thing mounts. So in my hand right here, this is your crankshaft position sensor. Like I said, it is one of 2 of arguably the most important sensors on your truck. Now, in the back of your block, 318, 360, it doesn't matter. This is where the distributor goes in. This is where the transmission mates up to. See these two spots right here? So if you'll notice, your sensor bolts just like that. And that's what I was telling you. It's a bear. You can imagine, with the cylinder head on it and the trans dipstick coming out of it. But if you get a swivel with a 13, at least on a 2000 model truck is a 13 millimeter, and run them two things out, I would recommend you pulling the dipstick. You don't have to pull the dipstick out. Maybe you might want to take the bolt out and just move it out of the way, because there is a rubber grommet that this thing fits into, and in the bell housing of the trans there's a notch, which, if you bear with me here for a second, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I got a spare trans. Okay, perfect. Let me move the 6th cord. So this is actually 46 RE, so this would be behind 360. But see that notch right there in that rubber? So this thing actually slides down in it like this, and that's what it looks like. And that rubber right there is to protect that sensor. So you can imagine when it's coming out, it's kind of tight with the dipstick. But basically, that's your crankshaft position sensor. If you've ever had the trans out of these, you know how important it is to make sure you don't catch that wire in this bell housing, or your truck or van or whatever you're working on is indefinitely not gonna start. So this is going on the shelf with the rest of the stock stuff. Like I said, that distributor actually has the cam position sensor in it. It's also a 3-wire, 2 different plugs, so you can't interchange them. It's kind of gray, it's dirty, but it's actually gray and a black plug. But these 2 sensors right here are arguably the most important on the truck. That's my oil pressure sender. I already pulled that out. That's something we can touch on real quick too. You may or may not know this. Your oil pressure sender goes in the back of your motor by the distributor. And we'll go back to our spare block real quick. So like again, distributor, what we just talked about, crankshaft, position sensor, mounting. This hole right here is a oil galley that runs through the block, and that's where that sensor threads into. We can actually thread it in right now. Now, these sensors obviously seal the oil. The thread type is called NPT, and that stands for National Pipe Thread. Basically, what that means is to seal that oil from coming past these threads, it's actually a tapered fit. So when you thread this into the block, it's not like a bolt where it's going to bottom out. The more you thread it into, the tighter it's going to get. But what you got to make sure is either one of 2 things. Either you put a thread tape on these threads before you run in there, or you use some kind of like liquid sealant. Right there, I got some thread sealant. That's what I used. That's strictly, up to you. Either way, you just don't want to get that stuff down inside here. Make sure, or the tape, make sure the tape's on the outside. They do make a special socket for this thing that I have. It's a really thin wall socket. But I want to touch on that. Yeah, so this is actually 1/8 inch NPT, 1/8 inch National Pipe Thread. And it goes in the back of the block. And if you're also curious on how I feed my turbo with oil, very simple. Come back here to the back of that block. It's kind of hard to see. It's just a T. It's an 1/8 inch pipe thread T. You can get that at Home Depot. And I just put a T in the block. Put your oil pressure sensor would go on top of that. Of course, I've got my new sensor already screwed in. And then you would do a line. I had a line made at a place called Cauliflower that does like hydraulics, and put a AN fitting. I believe it's a dash. I think it's a -4, I believe. So -4 male on one side and 1/8 inch National Pipe Thread on the other. And that screws into T. And then -4 line. And then runs all the way up here to the top of my turbo. And actually the turbo is actually 1/8 inch pipe thread too. So just, just some stuff I wanted to show you guys real quick if you're working on your own truck. And if you're curious, I'm going to get back at it, and we'll come back in a little bit for an update. Okay, as I continue to work, I figure we'll talk about a couple of things, and this might be useful to you guys that have a 5.2 or 5.9 in a truck. And you're just curious on some of the key players, sensors and stuff in your vehicle. What I'm holding in my hand right here is called a map sensor. Now, this map sensor typically bolts to the front of your factory throttle body. You see it has a little vacuum 90 degree that pushes on there, and just 2 screws. Really simple, and a connector. the job of this map sensor is to report back to the computer and let it know how much load is on the motor. So for instance, if you're driving out on the highway at 60 mile an hour, the motor is in a vacuum, and you're not going uphill, maybe you're going downhill, that would be a very, very light load. The computer would compensate, timing and fuel for that. And this is what it uses, to tell it the load of the vehicle, opposed to, when you're going uphill and your foot's flat to the floor. Again, this sensor tells lets the computer know, hey, we're at wide open throttle, we're out of the vacuum. The motor's not making vacuum because we are flat to the floor. The throttle's all the way open. This is, again, one of the very important sensors. The connector on it did change through the years, so, you just want to make sure you're putting, the correct one in your vehicle. So just want to touch on that real quick as I'm pulling mine off. I'll have to plug that port. So obviously I'm not going to use that port anymore. Probably not this one either. Another thing is air intake sensor. Right there. The air intake sensor typically is in the front. I know this is an M1. If you had just the factory motor, I believe it just screws in on this side of that keg manifold. Again, its only job is just to tell that computer how hot the air is coming to the motor, and sometimes there's things programmed inside it to pull a little bit of timing for detonation, valve ping, whatever you want to call it, reasons. Some people actually will take that, block it off, and stick it in their upper intake too for more accurate reading. They claim that because it's going into this aluminum intake, it does have the possibility to give a false reading because of just heat soak. A lot of metal soaks up heat. But again, just something else I want to touch on. I figure while I'm pulling this thing apart, the last thing I got to do is I'm going to pull that out. I got to plug to block it off. Coolant temperature sensor. Let's talk about coolant temperature sensor while I got you here. Depending on the year, there might be a little bit of a different setup. But for my 2000, if you look down in there where that 5/8 line's coming out, right there, that is the coolant temperature sensor, and it just keeps track of the coolant temperature, reports back to the computer, and then the computer tells the gauges what to read out on the cluster. It's down in there. It's a little guy, so if you were just curious where that was on your motor, there it is. Again, that is subject to change through different years if I remember correctly. So just something to think about. So I'm going to keep bumping along, and I will turn the camera back on in a bit, and we'll talk again. So far, so good. Everything's working out pretty good. Let me turn the camera around. I'm going to show you guys what I've got done so far and mounted. And then I made a jumper harness for my TPS. We'll check that out too. Hold on a second. Okay, so far here's what we got. Coolant temperature / pressure sensor is installed. So that's where that's going to go. I made a jumper harness for my throttle position sensor. So basically I had a spare harness. I cut about 4 or 5 inches, made a pigtail. Then I took Deutz connector with the crimper I showed you guys last time. Went ahead, crimped that on there, laid it in there. Fuel pressure sensors installed, oil pressure / temperature sensors installed. Went ahead and dropped our dual sync distributor in. It is not lined up, but that's no big deal. I'm really not concerned with that right now. MSD is going to stay where it's at. I still have to mount the map sensor. So I think what I decided to do is where the factory air intake temp went, I have to get a reducer bushing that goes from 1/2 inch MPT down to 1/8, and we'll screw our 3-bar right there. I also have to do something with the air intake temperature sensor, the new one for the Holly. What I have to do is I'm going to order an aluminum bung, and then I'll TIG weld that up. I use my TIG welder, we'll weld it up, and then we'll put the sensor right here on the pipe. So that's no big deal. I just have to get that. So far so good. We're just, like I said, bumping along. I think next I gotta figure out where to put this Dominator at. So I'm gonna work on that real quick, and then I'll come back to you and show you what I got. Okay guys, so pretty much finished for today. I've been messing with it off and on and trying to balance, watching Dolly as she runs around and puts everything in her little mouth that she can with her sharp little shark teeth. Because, puppy life. I have decided where I'm going to put the Dominator. between the two seats in the center console. And I know it's hard to see because it's dark, but there's a flat spot, that runs back and forth. I think I'm going to put it like right in the middle, and then that'll be a straight shot from a harness to run up through the center of the truck behind the dash. I can put something in the floor right next to it, which can run down and hit the transmission, run to the back, fuel pump stuff, and I think it's going to work out pretty good. So that's kind of my final decision on that. I'll probably have to pull the seat, at least one of the seats out, and pull the carpet back, so I can mount it. I'm going to do like a nutsert, I think. That's probably going to be my best bet. So we're going to do that. So thanks for watching. I'm going to put some shots of Dolly running around the yard, because who doesn't like puppies, right? We all like puppies. Stay tuned. Next week we come back, get the Dominator mounted, probably start to get our wiring, ready to go. Still have to pull the dash out, obviously. That's going to be, it's going to take an hour at least. Pull the dash out and figure where to put those bulkheads and start drilling holes. So, again, thanks for watching. See you guys next week.